Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Criterion Comments with Gray 1951. And tonight I'd like to talk very briefly about this very cool little experimental film called Night on Earth, directed by Jim Jarmusch and released in 1991. Now, this is a very strange little movie, not surprisingly coming from Jarmusch. And in talking about this, I don't have to worry too much about giving away spoilers because there's really no plot to speak of. What it is a series of 5 short films, or vignettes if you'd like to call it that, all centering around the same idea, the same concept, which is people riding in cabs and interacting with the cab driver. And that's pretty much all it is. And some of them are very funny, a couple of them are very serious, and they take place in 5 different cities in the world. Los Angeles, New York, Paris, Rome, and Helsinki, 5 major cities in the world. And the connecting point for the film is basically a shot on a wall someplace in a bus station or maybe an airport terminal of 5 clocks showing the times in these 5 different cities. And that's where it starts out. It just shows the 5 clocks, zeroes in on the first one, which is Los Angeles, tells the story, and then after that story is ended, it zeroes in on New York, and then it follows to the last one, which is Helsinki, Finland. So that's pretty much all it is. And so I don't know what to say about this, except that I think you have to appreciate Jim Jarmusch and his very bizarre style of filmmaking to appreciate something like this. But maybe not. Maybe this is something that a lot of people would have a good time sitting down and watching. Okay, Night on Earth. So it has a commentary. It has a couple of extra features, including a brief interview with Jarmusch, in which he says his idea for making this film was to show the insignificant moments of this slice of life of being in a cab. He said that he's been in cabs all over the world and always had interesting exchanges with cab drivers, interesting incidents, and some of which he used for the basis of these stories. And he said that the significant parts of being in a cab are the place you're leaving from, the place you're going to. What happens in between is totally insignificant. When you get together with a cab driver, that relationship has no future, it has no past. You can be completely honest or you can be completely dishonest, and it doesn't really matter. You can pretty much say whatever you want to. So he said the insignificant part of life being in a cab. I thought that was kind of cool that he said that. So this is a film about the insignificant parts of life. So anyway, so here are the stories. 5 stories. First one takes place in Los Angeles, and it stars, let's see, I need my glasses for this, okay. This is a nice little booklet, by the way, with lots of, it has a little essay on each one of these segments and lots of photographs. I haven't read all of them yet, but what I have read is pretty interesting. So the first one takes place in LA, and the cab driver is played by Winona Ryder. Her name is Corky. This tomboy. Her cab is a mess. She's got a little boom box. Remember, this is 1991. She's got a boom box sitting in the seat next to her. She's got stuff all over the place. She's a chain smoker. She picks up Jenna Rollins at an airport, at the LA airport. Her name is Victoria Snelling. And Jenna Rollins in this little story is a casting director for a Hollywood studio. And she's impeccably dressed. Her hair is in place, great jewelry, makeup, high heels. She's somebody who is very successful, has a lot of money, and a very busy and stressful life. She's constantly on the phone. And this is back in the days when cell phones had the antenna you had to pull out. So anyway, so she's getting in this cab at the airport with this tomboy, free-spirited girl played by Winona Ryder, and they have absolutely nothing in common, or so they think. And at first they're irritating each other because they seem to be so different. But as they start to talk and really look at each other, they find that they have more in common than what they thought at the beginning. So they have a very interesting conversation. All right, so nothing really happens during this one. It's not terribly dramatic. It's not terribly funny. It's just a very believable and sensitive conversation between two women who are very different, but who are finding things in common. Okay, so after that, then we go to New York City, and the cab driver in this one is played by a guy. I'll try to pronounce this actor's name, Armin Mueller-Stahl. He plays a guy named Helmut. He is a recent refugee from East Germany, and he is working as a cab driver. And there's a guy named Yo-Yo, played by Giancarlo Esposito, who is trying to catch a cab in New York City and having no luck at all. The only guy who will pick him up is this guy, recent refugee, and it happens to be the first night he's driving a cab, his very first customer, and he's scared to death, and he doesn't even know how to drive. The car is kind of jerking along because he doesn't have it in the right gear. So Esposito gets in the car, well, Yo-Yo gets in the car, and they start talking and all that. And the guy is driving so badly that Yo-Yo said, look, why don't we do this? Why don't you let me drive the cab? You sit in the passenger side. I want to go to Brooklyn. I'll pay you, no problem, but I don't like the way you're driving. So the guy agrees to it, and they start talking. And they have this really interesting exchange. They become very friendly. They like each other a lot. So as they go on, I think it's right before they get into Brooklyn, they come across this young woman played by Rosie Perez, who happens to be in the story Yo-Yo's sister-in-law. And he's very upset that she's out walking the streets late at night by herself, doing God knows what. So he drags her into the cab. She's Rosie Perez, and if you've ever seen Rosie Perez in any movies, you know that she has this piercing, screaming voice, and she screams pretty much constantly during her little part in this story. Well, she does quiet down after a while. And of course, they don't like each other, but she gets in the cab, so she starts interacting with this East German cab driver as well. And this segment is quite funny. Not rolling on the floor laughing funny, but it's really cool. And that's all I'm going to tell you. Okay, so the third segment goes to Paris, capital of France, and we have, let's see, let me try to pronounce these names. The cab driver is a guy played by an actor named Isaac de Bancolet, who is a Frenchman who is originally from Africa, and I think in the film he's supposed to be from the Ivory Coast. I'm not sure if that's exactly where the actor is from. And he's driving a couple of other Africans in the car. They're also speaking French. They're from a different country, and they start arguing with him and making fun of him. And they find out the country that he's from, and there's some sort of prejudice between the Africans from their country, which I think was Cameroon, and the people from the Ivory Coast. So the cab driver gets upset, says, "Get out of my cab." He leaves them stranded in the middle of nowhere. And then he picks up this young woman who happens to be blind. She's very well dressed. She's very pretty, very sexy, and she's very sure of herself. And she's not at all encumbered by the fact that she's blind. She knows how to find things and how to get into the cab and light a cigarette, just live by herself. And she's not at all a poor little blind girl, but he's fascinated by her, and he's trying to treat her as a poor little blind girl. She's not having any of it. So that's a very interesting exchange. All right. Then we go to Rome, and the cab driver in this one is played by none other than Roberto Benigni, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Maybe it's Benigni, I'm not sure, but it's a great performance. He picks up a priest played by Paolo Bonicelli, and this one is really funny because this guy gets this priest in his cab, and he's driving him from one side of Rome to the other, and all of a sudden the lapsed Catholic in him starts to feel guilty, and he decides he wants to make a confession. So this poor priest, who isn't feeling well, he's taking this little bit of medicine every once in a while. He's just really not feeling well at all. He's trapped in this cab with this guy who is talking a mile a minute. Benigni sounds like he's just talking constantly. He can't stop, and he gets faster and faster. It's like he's been taking speed for the past 3 days, and the priest is trapped. And a lot of what the cab driver is confessing to is really very funny. So this one has This one has a lot of comedy in it, but it does not end in comedy. It does not end well. That's all I'm going to tell you. Then we go to Helsinki, the capital of Finland. Okay, I don't know a lot about Helsinki, and I don't know if I can pronounce these actors' names, but I will try. The cab driver is named Mika, played by a guy named Matti Pelonpa. And there are three men that he picks up that they've all been drinking. One whom is pretty much passed out, but the other two are coherent and they can talk. They are played by Kari Vanenen, Sakari Kusomanen, and Tommy Salmela. And I looked up all these people on Wikipedia and IMDb to see if they were, pretty prominent actors, and they all have all the actors that I wasn't aware of. The ones from the French segment and the Finnish segment, they all have fairly long filmography, so I was quite surprised. So without telling you too much about this, we're in dark, cold, snowy Finland, and this guy picks up these three guys, and this one gets very dramatic. This one gets very, very dramatic, and there's a little bit of sort of the threat of violence going on. So that's the darkest segment of all, and it fits the environment that they're in. So all of these are really fascinating, just as sort of as Jarmusch said, in kind of an insignificant way. It's just watching people live during this strange segment of time. And one thing that's kind of common in a lot of Jarmusch films, if you've seen a lot of them, it's always about a sense of movement and sort of surveying the environment that the characters are in. So, for example, in the film Stranger Than Paradise, which was his very first feature film and the first one that I saw, they have the young girl who had just come to America from Hungary, who's taking a long walk through New York City, and you're seeing all the really bad parts of New York City. Then you have the long road trip that they all take, first to Cincinnati and then to Florida, okay? And it's the very same thing, for example, in his film Broken Flowers, which is basically one long road trip. And also Mystery Train, for sure, because these people from Japan coming into a totally new environment, Memphis, Tennessee, and showing you the absolute worst parts of Memphis, Tennessee as they walk through the city. So a lot of that happens here. You see the worst parts of LA, some really junky parts of New York, and then places in Paris and Rome, and well, I don't know much about Helsinki at all, but in Paris and Rome you see a lot of neighborhoods and streets that would not be the kind of things that people are looking for when they go as tourists. However, during the Roman segment, it's kind of interesting because this cab driver is driving very fast for all these one-way streets, and all of a sudden, right in front of them is a Colosseum. It's like, wow, where did that come from? It's like a spaceship just landed, but not expecting to see the Colosseum in this movie, considering everything else that has gone before. And it reminds me a little bit of one of the more recent films by Jarmusch, this film called Patterson, which came out in 2016, starring Adam Driver. And in this film, Patterson, the character, lives in Patterson, New Jersey, and he's a bus driver. So a lot of the film is about him just driving on his normal routine through the city, and everything that he sees every day, and how it changes slightly every day that he's doing his drive. So the theme of movement is very, very important to Jarmusch. And I guess that's all I really want to say about this, except that I would give this the highest recommendation. If you haven't checked this out, if you don't know a lot about Jim Jarmusch, this may be a good place to start. I don't know. I think it's a pretty fascinating little movie with some very good actors. Jenna Rollins is terrific. And one thing that's interesting about the Jenna Rollins character is that she is so elegant and so pulled together, which is so unlike a lot of the characters that she's played in films, especially the films directed by her husband, John Cassavetes. In fact, she's usually a little bit more like the free-spirited, slightly disheveled character played by Winona Ryder. So I thought that was kind of an interesting combination to put those two people together. I'm babbling. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think, if you've seen this film and if you like it. And I will be back with another one of these eventually. Take care.